Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. When you ask players what worries them the most about Star Wars Battlefront, then many will answer you that it is the netcode. The reason for this is that Battlefront uses the same engine as Battlefield 4, and it's made by the same studio as Battlefield 4, DICE Stockholm. So after the massive issues that Battlefield 4 had at launch, it's understandable that players are concerned about Battlefront. Now, while Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 players know what the netcode is, there are people that have never heard of it. Basically, there is no such thing as a netcode in a video game. It's a layman's term that is used when you talk about something related to the hit registration or the networking of a game. So if you are teleporting back and forth on a map, take damage behind cover, or when you hit a player but the hit does not register, then players and developers use the term netcode, as then everyone knows what they are talking about. So when Battlefield 4 was released, the netcode was just horrible. You got shot by players who were not even looking in your direction. You just blew up for no apparent reason. You took damage when vaulting over objects. You took way too much damage from a single hit. Bullets were seemingly able to fly around the corner of a building. You had rubber banding and a lot more. It was simply not fun to play. Now, during the last year, the developers of DICE Los Angeles and Visceral have worked extremely hard on all the components that players refer to as the netcode. They fixed countless of bugs and memory leaks. They made it more reliable and efficient. They significantly reduced the delay between the players, and they removed a lot of the hard-coded restrictions, which now allow simulation or tick rates of more than 30 Hz, which makes the game a lot more fluid and responsive. They also introduced several performance icons that alert us when there's something wrong with our internet connection or the performance of the server. So these icons let us know why we have a bad time while playing the game. On the PC and the Xbox One, we even got the extremely powerful network graph, which provides very detailed info in case that the performance icons are not enough for you. So the netcode has come a very long way in Battlefield 4, and the developers of DICE LA and Visceral are still improving it. Now the key question is, how much of that work did DICE Stockholm integrate into Star Wars Battlefront? What is very clear is that Battlefront is not a Battlefield competitor. It's an arcade game that is meant to be very easy to get into and just have some fun with. But what we must not forget is that when the netcode isn't good, then it doesn't matter if your game is called Battlefield or Battlefront. A bad netcode will harm your experience and the game will not be fun to play. So let's have a look at the Star Wars Battlefront beta and check out what we've got here. First of all, there's no server browser. The game does use dedicated servers, but you cannot directly select one and join it. You have to use the matchmaking system to play the game. This causes that players are not able to join servers outside of their own region, either on purpose or by accident. The matchmaking will always place you on a server inside of your own region. But this only works as long as all of the players inside of your party are from the same region, and as long as EA actually provides servers inside all of the regions that they sell the game in. But as all Battlefield 4 players will tell you, EA did not do that for Battlefield 4, where especially on the PlayStation and the Xbox we have very few server locations around the globe. Even less than on PC, where we already have big parts of the world without servers, that EA happily sold Battlefield 4 in regardless. So the server coverage is an extremely important topic if you consider to buy Star Wars Battlefront. Sadly, EA has not shared any info yet about the regions and countries that will host servers. If you have players from other regions on the same server is hard if not impossible to tell, as not even the PC version of the Star Wars Battlefront beta shows the ping in the scoreboard. What PC players do have access to though is the network graph, which can be enabled through the in-game console. The network graph in the Battlefront beta is older than the one that will be part of the Battlefield 4 fall patch. So I will not go through all the values that you see here in the beta, as I'm pretty sure that DICE Stockholm will either ship Battlefront with the latest net graph or include it in one of the first updates. In Battlefield 4 the net graph is also available on the Xbox One, as Microsoft allowed the developers to include it. But since the option to enable it in the settings is missing in the Star Wars Battlefront beta, it looks like only the PC version will have access to it when it comes out. But what is a much bigger issue in my opinion is that none of the Battlefield 4 performance icons are available in the Battlefront beta, and if it stays that way for the release version of the game, then you will not know when your internet connection is the reason for your troubles, or that the game server has an issue and you better try to join a different one. Even in an arcade game, you need that kind of information, as otherwise you are completely left in the dark why you have troubles when playing the game. But in a fast-paced multiplayer game, it's not just your connection to the server that matters. It's also about how fast the game processes, sends and receives data. If that's not very efficient, then the game itself will cause additional delays on top of the ping of your connection, and this was one of the major problems of Battlefield 4 when it launched. Now, how good is the netcode of the Star Wars Battlefront beta? To find out, I ran my usual delay tests. This means that I have two PCs side by side, where each of them connects to the server using its own fiber internet connection. They both have a 144Hz gaming monitor and run the game at more than 144 frames per second. Then I perform a series of tests which I capture at 400 frames per second with my camera. This allows me to measure the actual in-game delays between two players. In the first test, one player jumps and I measure the time it takes for the other player to see him jump. The second test is a bit more complex. One player shoots at the other, and I measure how long it takes until the other player takes damage and sees the player fire his gun. These tests are very easy to do in Battlefield 4, where you have a server browser and the players can switch teams. In Battlefront this was a bit more work, but eventually I managed to do 20 test runs for each of these test cases, and these are the results. On a server to which both of my players had a ping of 34 milliseconds, the shortest measured delay for the jumping was 107 milliseconds. The worst measured was 140, while most of the time the delay was in the 115 milliseconds area. For the receiving of damage, the lowest measured delay was 100 milliseconds. The worst was 110, while most of the time it took around 102 milliseconds until the player received damage. And for the firing animation, the lowest measured delay was 107 milliseconds, the worst was 160, and most of the time it took around 115 milliseconds until the target player would see the shooter fire his gun. Now, these are a lot of interesting numbers, but how does this compare to Battlefield 4? To find out, I ran the same set of tests again in the current retail version of Battlefield 4, and as you can see, the beta of Star Wars Battlefront does quite well. This means that DICE Stockholm did include a lot of the netcode improvements provided by DICE and Visceral, which is really great for this game. But the developers didn't stop after the release of the Battlefield 4 summer patch. Very soon they will release the fall patch, which has even more netcode improvements inside that will reduce the delays even further, as you can see here in the results from the Battlefield 4 CTE. So these are the default delays that you will encounter in these games when you play at a ping of about 30 milliseconds on a 144Hz monitor and at more than 144 frames per second. But as I mentioned before, the Frostbite engine is no longer limited to a simulation or tick rate of 30 Hz. If you increase the tick rate to 60 Hz, then this decreases these delays even further. And at a tick rate of 120 Hz, the delays are not much higher than the travel time of the data. But Battlefront is not a competitive shooter, it's an arcade game for some casual fun, you might say. That is true, but as soon as your game runs at 60 frames per second, which it also does on console, then you will benefit from the higher tick rates, as that does not only reduce the delays, but it also makes the game feel more fluid and responsive. And these higher tick rates also help with some of the issues and glitches that you face at 30 Hz, because the game has more data to work with at higher rates. So to say that Battlefront does not need more than a 30 Hz tick rate because it's an arcade shooter is in my opinion the same nonsense as saying that it does not need to run at 60 frames per second because it's an arcade shooter. The game feels better and works better when it runs at a simulation or tick rate of more than 30 Hz. And here the players might benefit from the lower player count of Battlefront, as that will make it easier for DICE Stockholm to increase the default tick rate of the game above 30 Hz, while this is a bigger issue in Battlefield 4 since it has up to 64 players. So will Star Wars Battlefront ship with the working netcode? EA and DICE have clearly learned their lesson from Battlefield 4 and they try to make sure that Star Wars Battlefront works on release. And I'm sure that it will work better than Battlefield 4 did, because the test results show that DICE Stockholm has included a lot of the improvements that Battlefield received during the last year. But there are still a few recent ones that Battlefield will highly benefit from, so I hope that these can be added before the game is released or close after. However, no one can guarantee that the online gameplay will be as smooth as it can be, especially because we do not know in which regions EA will provide servers in. And Battlefield still shows us how unenjoyable a game can become when the server coverage is bad, especially on console. So if the server coverage is as bad as in Battlefield 4, then all these fine netcode enhancements will not help when there are players on the server who have ridiculously high pings or packet loss. Also, the performance icons must be integrated into Battlefront, not just to be made aware of issues that my internet connection has, but also to get an alert when the game server is suffering from a performance issue, which will happen especially in the first weeks after release, as we have to expect that some new issues will surface when the game is released. And that is true for pretty much every online multiplayer game, so don't expect that it will run perfectly from day one. Besides that, the quality of the matchmaking logic will be critical, because it will not be fun if that puts you into poorly balanced matches. So that is what you should consider when you plan to buy Star Wars Battlefront on release or to pre-order it now. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris and this was Battle Nonsense.